Thruster. If you aren't familiar with the name, I don't fault you, but boy do they have a story to tell. The information can be vague at times, so I do apologize as I attempt to piece together one of the most interesting BMX startups of the 70s. Let's talk Thruster. I do apologize, I am a bit nasally today. I'm not sick, don't worry. It's just North Carolina winters. We go from 18 degrees to 60 in the same day, and my body doesn't know what to do with it. And I do have to preface this. I have been fortunate enough on this channel to find a lot of good quality information on a lot of the companies that we have discussed. But Thruster, on the other hand, was rather difficult finding good solid sources of information. With that being said, I'm going to present with you the info that I have found about Thruster, and we're going to try to piece it together. The Thruster origin story really involves a handful of names: Sam Miller, Sr. and Jr., Tom Daniels, Lee Van Ormer, and Ron Vigneri. But in my opinion, the true origin of Thruster starts with an assassination, if you can believe that. Let's start with Tom Daniels. Tom, who I couldn't find an actual photo of to save my life, co-owned a company called Race Car Engineering and specialized in making car chassis. One reason I did find that a lot of this information was hard to dig up, especially in the internet age. You'd think everything's on the internet. Well, it's not. It's because these places have such original names like Race Car Engineering. You try Googling that. I tried everything. It's very difficult to find info on some of this stuff, so bear with me. Race Car Engineering made chassis for Sam Miller, who was attempting to break the land speed record. And that's kind of where his connection to Sam Miller comes in. Tom's business partner at the time was in the south side of Chicago, leaving an auto parts store when he was assassinated. His partner's widow got involved with the business and took Tom to court. The legal proceedings dragged out, and Tom decided to let the business go. Now, let's put Tom to the side for a second and leave him in need of a new income source. This is where the Millers come in. If you have heard of them, then you have likely heard of Sam Miller Jr., nicknamed Slammin Sammy Miller, the world's fastest accelerating man, where he went from 0 to 60 in 0.28 seconds and hit around 13 Gs at the time. And he has a slew of records to his name. He held the quarter-mile world record at 3.58 seconds, where he hit 386 miles an hour. He also held the 8-mile world record, where he hit 319 miles an hour at 2.54 seconds. He also had a series of rocket cars that were dubbed Vanishing Point and were super popular at the time. And I am not somebody to be talking about someone's accolades in the drag racing industry. I know very little about it. I think it's cool, but, we can only have 24 hours in a day, and I can only have so many hobbies and interests. Suffice it to say, at the time, though, he was well known. But before Sam Miller Jr. was racing rocket cars, he started out by working for his father's construction company, dubbed Miller Construction. His job was to demo old buildings. When Sam Miller Jr. and Sr. got into drag racing, they were building cars out of their garage, and they called it Speed Unlimited, who some of you in the BMX world may have heard of. Sam Miller Sr. was acquainted with Tom Daniels through this venture because Tom would make car chassis for the small Speed Unlimited outfit. When Tom left his business because of the legal proceedings with his partner's widow, he needed money. The Speed Unlimited crew saw the popularity of the growing BMX sport and probably thought, man, if we can make drag cars, we can make BMX bikes and capitalize on this BMX craze. And that's exactly what they did. The Millers hired Tom Daniels to make BMX bikes out of their Speed Unlimited garage. Tom Daniels was the first builder and designer of the Thruster project. And to be honest here, we are here to discuss Thruster BMX. That is, I have to stay on topic here. But if you want another good story to check out, dig into Sam Miller and the Speed Unlimited outfit, Ron Vigneri, and all these people that were involved with the rocket car escapades. I went down too much of a rabbit hole with this video, but let's stay the course here. And since Miller was known for his drag racing and speed record attempts, the Thruster brand became synonymous with the rocket cars, with most of the names stemming from the rocket cars that were part of Rocket Man Incorporated, a corporation jointly owned by Sammy and Ron Vigneri. I apologize if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. But Ron was a rocket engineer out of Kinnelon, New Jersey. And in 1978, the first Thruster bike was born and known as the Thruster LSR, standing for Land Speed Record. So with their first couple of bikes out, Speed Unlimited was growing at a good click and needed a bigger spot. Miller Construction had property at 105 Dorset Avenue, Wayne, New Jersey, that was used for storage and kind of a staging area for the construction company. This is what ultimately became the Speed Unlimited factory. At this point, the newly formed Thruster knew that they needed top riders to test and race their product. So in 1978, they picked up soon-to-be NBL National #1 Sal Zuner and his brother Terry. And the next big signing was none other than Tim Judge. They had bikes like the Thruster Tim Judge Replica, the Thruster 2, the Thruster Tri-Power, Vanishing Point, which one of the more interesting ones in my opinion is the Tri-Power, because it did have that, I would call it the second top tube right under it for making the frame stronger. But because of the good reputation Speed Unlimited was garnering, they ended up having contracts with Hutch and Puck, P-U-C-H. I wasn't familiar with this BMX brand. I'm going to call it Puck because Pooch just sounds weird. But they started making BMX bikes for them. And I would argue that Hutch had a much better reputation than Thruster ever did as just a sole BMX brand, but Speed Unlimited was the ones making the bikes for Hutch at the time. But with all that Thruster and Speed Unlimited had going for it, there was an equal amount working against the company. Quality control issues and time were always an issue at Speed Unlimited. Sammy was technically the head of the company, but I think it's safe to say that Thruster was more of a side project for him. This guy was a star of the drag world. Rocket cars and land speed records were now his main push. This means he was not available all the time to make decisions regarding Speed Unlimited and Thruster. A couple of articles have stated the company was very disorganized and always under financial stress. Enter one Lee Van Ormer, a New York City entrepreneur who was sold controlling interest in the company. With a name like that, how could you not be a New York City entrepreneur? That's funny. But you definitely have to put yourself in the headspace of Speed Unlimited at the time. Even though they were growing, Tom had a bunch of health issues, Sammy was always busy and not around, the company was losing money left and right, they really needed someone to take the reins. Now, I tried to dig up some information on Lee, and I think he knew about Speed Unlimited because of connections with Miller Construction and that he dabbled in drag racing himself. But suffice it to say, Lee was not the answer that Speed Unlimited needed. Lee was a good investor, but not so much an administrator. Even though Lee brought capital with him, the company stayed disorganized and financially stressed. So, with Lee taking the reins, nothing actually changed. And look, Tom Daniels had been seriously electrocuted years before when he was working as a lineman. He had been in a very contentious divorce, and he had all the stress from Speed Unlimited. Then to me, it really sounds like Tom was just doing his best. More than likely, he was the day-to-day manager of Speed Unlimited, but the stress of trying to make this startup work got the best of him, and he had to step away. Around 1983, Tom Daniel would turn over full control of Thruster to Lee Van Ormer. And not even a year later, in 1984, Tom would pass away from a heart attack. Now, and I do need to clarify something because we keep going back and forth. Speed Unlimited and Thruster were essentially one and the same, but Thruster is the BMX brand, while Speed Unlimited was the manufacturer. So Thruster did not make the Hutch bikes, Speed Unlimited did. But Thruster and Speed Unlimited continuously got hit in the mid-80s. Financial struggles, Lee taking over the company, Tom passing away, and what I think was one of the final nails in the coffin was after Tom's passing, tragedy struck one of their factory riders. And that rider's name was Brad Dahlbeck. I stopped racing abruptly in July of 1984 when I was 16 due to a really bad injury. I had a freak accident while racing at Howell that instantly threw me headfirst into the ground, shattering the fourth cervical vertebrae in my neck. This caused a severe spinal cord injury which left me a quadriplegic, permanently paralyzed from the chest down. It was something that was completely out of my control, and it could have happened to anyone, even with the best of skills. I spent the next 6 months in hospital and rehab learning to live and cope with my profoundly altered life, and I now have to use a wheelchair to get around. It was and still is very tough to deal with, but through it all, I've kept a positive and realistic attitude. I did have complete control over how I was going to deal with it. I chose to keep my head up and do my best to better myself, and that helped a lot. I also had great support from my family and my friends. I live life to the fullest. I know it's a cliche, but it's the best way to describe how I now have to live my life. I now realize how much little things we all take for granted. Now we're going to talk about Ron. Ron had helped Sammy with numerous activities concerning the bike business, on top of being a rocket engineer and helping him with that. He made a bike frame design that could be rapidly manufactured from 4-arch chromoly tubes that required no jigs to weld the head, bottom bracket, dropouts, and seat tubes to the frame tubes. And the design could be produced in all bike and frame and wheel sizes. This bike was dubbed the Phazer. So 5 Phazer prototypes were built in 1981 at the Speed Unlimited shop to introduce Tom to the new manufacturing process. These bikes didn't require jigs or anything like that are expensive. The Phazer was to be the next Speed Unlimited production BMX model, and if it went well, more sizes and models were to follow. A production run of 100 bikes was funded by Ron and just sold directly. But a business arrangement could not be met between the parties, and Ron held on to the design and still does. I'd be curious what actually happened between Ron and Sammy, but one thing's for certain, Sammy and Ron ended their partnership in court proceedings in 1983, and in 1985, Sammy and a guy named Vink, who Hink was also a rocket vehicle racer, they decided to copy the Phazer design, and they built bikes in Sweden that were marketed under the name Rocket X1. And both Sammy and Hink claimed to have invented this design. The frames were built in Zandam by Rocket Bike BV in 1984. But all of these issues just kept compounding and compounding and compounding until Speed Unlimited was ultimately made to shut its doors. I believe that was like 84, 85. So the Speed Unlimited thruster had a relatively short run. They didn't even make it that 10-year mark that we kind of set as the standard for all these big BMX companies to last before they sell to someone else. That is what happened to the OG thruster, and to me it is one insane story that deserves a deeper dive and a deeper look. I'm going to keep looking into it, but the overarching story is you've got Sam Miller and his dad with Miller Construction getting into drag racing and building rocket cars with the help from Ron. That they want to capitalize on BMX bikes because they think it's going to be an easy business model to jump into. Tom Daniels' partner was assassinated for whatever reason that I can't even find info about. So they bring him in to kind of head up the BMX stuff. Suffice it to say, wasn't as easy as maybe they thought, and they had to bring in Lee Van Ormer. And I also read that Lee maybe went to federal prison, but that was, I would say, internet rumors. Like, I couldn't actually find anything that said that he went to prison for anything. So take that with a huge grain of salt. So the list just keeps piling on. You've got mismanagement, financial issues at Speed Unlimited, Tom Daniels passing, one of their factory riders getting paralyzed from the neck down, and now you've got Sammy trying to essentially steal Ron's bike idea. There's so many layers to the thruster story. I would have to classify their startup as one of the most interesting out of all of the businesses that we have looked at on this channel. But of course, we covered Tom's passing. Lee passed of old age, and Slammin Sammy Jr. sadly was killed in an accident on Tuesday, October 29th in 2002 while working in the Texas oil fields for his company Applied Force. It was a flow line explosion that killed Sammy and injured 8 others, and he was only 57 at the time of his passing. I hope that gives you a little insight into the Thruster company. Please, by all means, if you have anything to add, I did see that Thruster is still a company. They have some cool looking bikes on their website. I will show that here now, right here. It's on the screen. I reached out to them to get any info about who owns it now. Haven't heard anything back. I will update you guys if they do respond. But yeah, if anybody has any more details to a story like this, please add it below. We will probably revisit Thruster in the future. But suffice it to say, they got a crazy story. And if you made it this far, please, by all means, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. That's how you can support me as well. Sharing these videos also helps because the BMX stuff sometimes isn't 100% searchable. So if you share it, it helps. Other than that, I do have the membership stuff going where I release the videos a little bit earlier, but don't feel obligated. The membership stuff is really just if you want to support my project to bring the history of cycling to you guys. And if you have any recommendations, please leave them below. And I will see you all in the next video. We're approaching 20K. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.